Okay, so you look at Proverbs 31. What we're going to do is we're going to read, well, let me read the first verse, and then we'll read the two different sections together. But that first verse says, the words of King Lemuel, the oracle unto which his mother disciplined him. So following that superscription, the sayings of King Lemuel have two different poems. The first is a poem on the noble king, so that's verses 2 through 9. Which often people will kind of segregate 1 through 9 together and 10 through 31 together. But the second poem is the acrostic. It's the noble wife or the valiant wife, which is what in Hebrew what that means. Now again, like I said, many commentators ascribe or they suggest that superscription in verse 1 only covers the part about the noble king in the first 9 verses. But the correct way to understand this in the original language is that the superscription, this is King Lemuel, these are the sayings from his mother, it's all of this together. It's both this poem and this poem together. Okay? In fact, one scholar I was reading, he basically makes the point that it would make zero sense for there to be a superscription for those 9 verses and then 10 through 31 to just be this analogous section on its own that has no sort of, it would be some sort of foreign body to Proverbs. So verse 1, at least the first half, it identifies the genre, so it's words, it's sayings, it's an oracle, perhaps what you have, and its author is King Lemuel. Lemuel means dedicated to God. And this king, we've talked a little bit about it, last week we talked about Agur. He's unattested in the line of Israel's history as a king, as any kind of noble person. We don't know anything about him. He probably was a Gentile convert, kind of like we talked about with Agur. But king, so these sayings are royal instruction, okay? So designed to equip a ruler to discharge his duties wisely and justly. And then the second half of that, the oracle unto which his mother disciplined him, it identifies these words, these sayings, as prophetic. Okay, it's an oracle. All right, and it explains the authorship. His mother disciplined him. If you remember, in chapter 1, verse 8, we read something somewhat similar to that. Proverbs 1:8, hear my son, your father's discipline, do not abandon your mother's instruction. Okay, so either the author is the mother, or more probably he is conveying this tradition from his mother. Okay, so it's important for us to understand. All of that being said, it's important for us to understand this superscription is tying all of this together. This section and this section both together are these sayings. Okay, it's not just this and then this is just a nice piece to end Proverbs. No, it's all together. It's all together. Okay, so we'll take the first 9 verses. Seth, why don't you read verse 2? We'll take one verse at a time. We'll go all the way around the room one at a time, and when you get to verse 9, we'll stop there. Start verse 2.
What, O my son, and what, O son of my womb, and what, O son of my vows?
Do not give your strength to women, your ways to those who destroy kings.
It is not for kings to Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine, or for rulers to take strong drink.
For they will drink and forget what is decreed, and pervert the rights of all the afflicted.
Give strong drink to the one who is perishing, and wine to those in bitter distress.
Let him drink and forget his poverty, and remember his trouble no more.
And verse 8, open your mouth for the mute, for the justice of all those passing away.
Open your mouth, judge righteously, and render justice to the afflicted and needy.
Okay, and we kind of have this broken down here, where you have this introductory admonition, verse 2, to hear. You have admonitions to show restraint, one in regard to women, one in regard to intoxicants. And you have ways that this is shown in 4 through 7. And the last 2 verses, an admonition to give new edicts for the poor. So instruction on how to care and protect for the poor. And so as with if you remember those 30 sayings of the wise, there was a warning against immoral women, and that's linked with a warning against intoxicants. So we see that here as well. 6 of these 8 verses in 2 through 9 pertain to caring for the poor, and 4 of them pertain to liquor, okay, to strong drink, to intoxicants. And the last 4 consist of really this kind of negative couplet that has 2 very positive admonitions. So let's just take them one at a time. So look at verse 2. You see this repetition of my son, okay? And perhaps yours says listen, mine says what? It's the same idea, listen, the word ma, okay? And so the mother is admonishing him to take heed, listen to what I'm saying, okay? And she even traces that relationship backward from the present to when he was in the womb. O son of my womb, O son of my vows, even before pregnancy, okay? So you come to verse 3. In the first command, do not give your excellence to women or your ways to that which blot out kings. So your excellence, your ways, those are metonymies, they're metaphors for the things that contribute to a strong dynasty. So she's warning against unrestrained sexual gratification, okay? And that which blots out kings in verse 3 is another kind of image of the sort of women who's not going to build up the home, okay? But instead, and you see this, think about like movies or different, TV shows or books, where you have kind of a woman who is crafty, and she really, instead of an army destroying a dynasty, it's one woman who's destroying a dynasty by drawing the king's heart away or something like that, corrupting the king's power, distracting his attention from serving the people, maybe undermining his government, maybe squandering the wealth of the nation. Great example of this is David's obsession with Bathsheba that led to all sorts of flagrant violations of justice. Now, in that case, it was more so David's fault than hers. But the problem here that the mother's warning Lemuel about is watch out for that. Don't let that be a stumbling block. Okay, so an admonition to show restraint towards this sort of woman. Verses 4 through 7 talk about intoxicants, and these verses 4 through 5, really the idea is don't get drunk and forget to protect the poor. So again, this is royal instruction. So the queen, King Lemuel's mother, is warning kings don't drink wine because intoxicants, like being obsessed with women, can undermine just decrees that are established to protect the poor. So you see how he says, lest he drink and forget what is decreed concerning justice. Verse 5, pervert the justice of all the afflicted. So perverting the things that have already been given in favor of people who are afflicted. Okay, so don't let that be a cause for you to no longer protect them, to neglect the poor that are in your care. So you come to verses 6 and 7. It's another couplet here. And really the idea here is kind of interesting, we'll think about. Giving intoxicants to the poor to forget their misery. So it might be a citation of an older saying that was addressed to the people in general. Now it's applied to Lemuel, but it says, give strong drink to him who is perishing, and wine to those whose soul is bitter. Now, there's sarcasm here. Even in the Hebrew, there's sarcasm here. This isn't like a new government welfare program where we're going to offer wine to the masses and make everyone feel good. Taken literally, the command would be contrary to wisdom. We've seen that already. Drinking that drowns distress doesn't solve anything. The command is really to debunk that intoxicants are useless, that they're completely useless. The misery of the poor needs to be alleviated by the king who's protecting them. And that's indicated really by the next section of verses. So again, a sense of sarcasm here, debunking the idea that intoxicants are worthless or useless, but perhaps here's a better way. So again, in verses 8 and 9, she addresses Lemuel. Okay, the king has to speak up for these people. You see that even in later on in the chapter when describing the valiant woman. Verse 20, she extends her hands to the poor. She stretches out her hands to the needy. That this needs to describe the king as well. You see verse 8, open your mouth for the mute, for the justice of all those passing away. Okay, it's repeated at the beginning of verse 8, beginning of verse 9. Open your mouth, open your mouth. Okay, speak up. So for the justice, so verdicts, render justice in verse 9. So deliver the oppressed. And the idea here, the word picture here is of, like you see in verse 8, open your mouth for the mute. Okay, speak up for the mute. Someone who lacks a voice to defend themselves in court. I'm sure you could speak to this in your experience. Like people that, there's no one to defend them. There's no one that can vouch for them, can lend credibility to them. They're no one, and they're up against, someone who can even bend the court to their will. Maybe they're too illiterate to counteract, someone who's powerful and wicked. Maybe they're too inarticulate to state their case convincingly. Maybe they're too poor to obtain relevant evidence. Maybe they're too lowly to command any respect. Maybe they're too vulnerable to abuse from being bribed. The king, the idea here is the king is the only human defense in this situation against the ungodly. Okay? All those passing away, for the justice of all those passing away. Again, it's another kind of metaphor for the afflicted and the needy that you see at the end of verse 9. So the noble king, these are admonitions, repeated admonitions from his mother, from Lemuel's mother, on, okay, as a king, this is how you are to behave. This is how you're to treat the people that are in your care. Okay? I think there's probably many different applications that we could make to this. Even if we may not ever be in the sorts of positions, like none of us in this room are probably ever going to be senators someday, or, as if they have all the power anyway. But none of us are going to be in some of the situations that we'll see. But think of people that are in your care, even if you're just a parent, I think there's application to be found. If you have any thoughts on that, before we jump into the next section, I'd love to hear it. Any thoughts that come to mind as you're thinking through this? It's okay if not.
From my perspective on 8 and 9,
Mm-hmm.
in my job, I was a prosecutor.
Yeah.
But I was often prosecuting cases in which there were legitimate victims and advocating for justice for them.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the defense attorney, he was advocating for his client,
Mm-hmm.
who sometimes, it was a reality that
Sure.
sometimes we indicted people that actually were not guilty. It doesn't happen very often, but
Yeah.
but sometimes that happens, and you have to have both sides of that to advocate for people, one way or the other, who cannot defend themselves from whatever's going on.
For sure. Yep. Anybody else?
I think the social pressures are the opposite of showing restraint, and the admonition to show restraint is a good reminder.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Anybody else? Okay. Well, let's move into the second section, which definitely will take more of our time. Often you hear this section as the excellent wife. It's really the same meaning The strict Hebrew would translate to the valiant woman. Okay, obviously, and often why we think of this woman as the excellent wife is really because in our English, the idea of valor or valiant, a warrior battle, it's less. It's just less of a common way that we think in our normal vernacular. And so the idea of excellence is a perfectly fine translation. And obviously this woman has a husband, and there are benefits to her husband that we'll see. There's value to her husband that we'll see very clearly. And so excellent wife is a perfect way to describe this section. Just for my purpose, I'm going to be referring to this section as a valiant wife. But really, this is a song of praise to the valiant wife that brings Proverbs to a close. And if you read the article that I had linked from John Piper, he notes how this is an entire acrostic. So all these verses to the end, all 22 verses, each one is an acrostic in the Hebrew alphabet. Okay, the initial letter of each verse follows the sequence of the Hebrew alphabet, which again, it's intentional. It's Holy Spirit inspired. Okay? What this does often, or what I think we could deduce often in literature like this, is that the purpose is that it achieves a sense of totality, of completeness. Okay? I think Waltke, he thinks of this as the valiant woman, everything about the subject from A to Z is kind of the way we're to think about it. And so this acrostic is structured pretty logically too. So we see in the introduction, which is about her value, we see that her value is inferred by the scarcity of someone like her. We see her value and regards her specific worth to her husband. We see this in a number of ways that we'll point out. In the main body of the section, verses 13 to 27, we see her activity. So her cottage industry, okay? Not like a cottage in the woods, her industriousness, okay? There is a Janus that we'll look at that kind of sandwiches the section, splits it in half. And then the latter half, you see her social achievements, okay? And then at the conclusion is the praise that she receives from her family and also from all people, okay, from onlookers. And so the speech has 3 stanzas, really, that progress from the husband's trust of his wife to the way that his political or social empowerment as a result of her value, and then you see his praise for her. And really that main body proceeds logically from, you see income that she receives. It's generated by her skills, particularly her weaving skills, her trading skills, all the way to the different accomplishments she has on the basis of her economic prowess, okay? And so as for like the genre of a poem like this, one author I thought was interesting. He classifies the poem as heroic. It's like it's recounting a hero's mighty deeds, okay? And something like this would be recounting her, someone's military exploits. And then there was a paper that actually our Bruce Waltke, one of his classes, one of his students submitted a paper. It's really interesting. And this one gal was writing about this section. She says, heroism in the battlefield is transposed to a woman's vita active in home and community. And she adds that the valorous wife is a spiritual heir of Israel's ancient heroes and a champion, she says, for those around her by her diligent application of wisdom. Okay? And so, and at the very end of her paper, like how she put this, the valorous wife is a heroic figure used by God to do good for his people, just as the ancient judges and kings did good for God's people by their martial exploits, their military exploits. Okay? But my question is, does it praise, because this is a question that scholars wrestle with, and it's worth noting, I think we all probably know the answer to this, but they wrestle with, does it praise a real woman? Or, like we've seen throughout Proverbs in different places, like in the prologue, does it praise the personification of wisdom? Okay, is this a praise of a real woman or a personification of wisdom? Is she a personification of wisdom, and then the poem is instructing the son to embrace wisdom as a wife to help him provide for the family? But if she's a real woman, like Ruth, for instance, who was also praised at the gates as a valiant woman, then she emerges instead as an important contributor to the economy of the family, the community. And I would argue that the exegesis that follows, it validates a real woman. Every other occurrence of Isa in Proverbs refers to a real woman. And that's the word that's used, Isa. So I think this is a real one. But scholars will they'll keep going. They're like, okay, well, how real is she? Okay, who could possibly achieve all these exploits that you see? In how many lifetimes? How could someone achieve all these things? Implying no one ever could. One author writes, there are a great many women whose activities equal the ones described from Proverbs 30. And when he notes, he said most 19th century American farm wives would need a broad array of skills in handicraft, agriculture, poultry farming, commerce, home economics, child rearing, working from dawn, working to dark, while remaining generous and God-fearing. So in his article, he would argue, there's been women like this before. Of course there have. And of course, the suggestion's not that the valiant wife is the family's sole breadwinner. That's not even what Lemuel's mother is saying. Up to now, Proverbs has been exclusively focused on the son's character, okay, and his work. This song of praise to the valiant wife assumes the husband has founded the home on a sound economic foundation, and on that firm foundation, his wife has settled down with him, and she is functioning at her maximum capacity. Okay? And so the valiant wife, I would argue, is canonized here as a role model for all Israel for all time. So wise daughters aspire to be like her, wise sons seek to marry her, and all wise people aim to, in a sense, incarnate her values that you see. And verse 10 really is kind of the argument that it's hard to dispute. An excellent wife who can find? Her worth is far above pearls. Maybe yours says jewels or rubies. This is who the wise son is to seek. Okay? So, I'd argue this is a real woman. All right? But not, good for Lemuel that he found a woman like this. What about me? No. This is someone to strive after. So, why don't we read through some of this? Let's read here. I'll just start with you, Dad. Can you read 10 through 12?
An excellent wife who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. Okay. So even in those initial words, an excellent wife, esetayil, immediately the focus is being given to this woman who, and this word hayil, it really is connoting competent strength. And this is really a word that's used in like the military class, like a warrior class. And that's why the idea of the valiant woman is really the kind of the raw translation here. But the question is, who can find? Okay, the expected answer is almost no one. It's not no one, it's almost no one. Okay, and as far as this woman, it's not this woman because she's married. She's been found. Okay, but the question is, even though it's rhetorical, should awaken within the audience that's reading this the desire to find such a wife. Okay? Be like her, to imply that she's precious, she's rare, she's attractive. The assertion her worth is far above pearls or jewels. Okay? You come to verse 11. The heart of her husband trusts in her. That is, to me, that's remarkable. For this reason, in the Old Testament, right here, and then in Judges 20, this is the only places in Scripture where everywhere else Scripture condemns trusting in anything or anyone apart from God. Okay? The exception here elevates this woman to the highest level of spiritual competence. The claim implies that this couple enjoys a robust relationship. So his trust, okay, the heart of her husband trusts her. His trust is well-founded. And it says he will have no lack of gain. Okay, again, military metaphor implying that this woman wins life's essentials through strategy, through timely strength, through risk. Where did I put it? Salal is the word here for gain, for military spoil. Okay, the only other place that we see that is in chapter 1, verse 13. We're going back to the gangs. Remember the gangs that are tempting the young man to obtain spoil by joining them? Okay. The son's warned to avoid the sinners. Don't go after their spoil because of how they have obtained it. Here, the spoil is actually what the husband receives from his valiant wife, who is most desirable. Okay? And this is kind of where I have a few questions I want you to think about, see what we come up with. So, in what ways would the woman in this poem depict a wife who can be trusted? If you think about her industriousness, okay, you think about her social achievements, the ways even that she elevates her own husband, the way she cares for her husband, the way she cares for her family, she makes clothes for them, she buys a field, she brings her food from afar, she's industrious. What ways can she be trusted? And I realize we haven't read the whole chapter quite yet, but just in your understanding of having read it before, in what ways does this woman depict a wife who can be trusted? She fears the Lord. Well, you stole my thunder. That's the best answer. That is the best answer.
That's the start. That's the start
Yes.
of how you can trust.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
then it flows from, she's not going to embarrass her husband. She's going to take care of her home. She's going to take care of her children. She's going to just be all of that. But primarily, she's going to support and not embarrass her husband.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. I think that's good. I think that's right. When you think about what we've thought about and considered throughout Proverbs, what teaching from Proverbs is seen in the depiction of a woman like this who's as active from before sunrise till after sunrise or sundown? What sort of teaching in Proverbs is seen in the depiction of this sort of woman? And I have some places to help our answers. But any thoughts?
It may be demeaning, but kind of ant.
Mm-hmm.
The ant's
Yeah. Yeah.
But still provides food.
I want to be like an ant.
I wish I had the energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
But industrious, maybe not just sitting around.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a phrase in the New Testament. As soon as I say it, you'll remember it. Redeeming the time. Paul says, look carefully how you walk. It's Ephesians 5, 15, 16. Therefore, look carefully how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Same thing, really, in Colossians 4, 5. Walk in wisdom, in this sense, toward outsiders, redeeming the time. This sort of woman is redeeming her time. No one's saying you can't have vacation. No one's saying there's not time for rest. In fact, Sabbath rest is imposed at this point. This is an expectation to make sure that you do rest. But at the same time, her time is redeemed in so many different ways. I had something else on my mind. I can't remember it, but yeah, she's redeeming the time. I think. Anyone else have anything to add to that?
The comment in my Bible when it talks about it says making the most of your time.
Yes.
We are to make the most of our time on this evil earth in fulfilling God's purposes, lining up every opportunity for useful worship and service, being aware of the brevity of life.
Yep. Was that from our favorite Dr. MacArthur?
It is.
Yes. Excellent as always. So, I mean, taking this all together, as far as her value, verse 12, she deals bountifully with him for good and not evil all the days of her life, really defining the extent and the duration of her value. So intentionally, she deals intentionally, deliberately, bountifully, again, another word to kind of escalate the ironic not evil. She deals bountifully with him, not evil. The body of the poem is really going to define what it means by she deals bountifully with him for good. So in what ways are they good and not evil? And all the days of the life, again, she never fails her husband. Okay? So we come to the larger section. This is the main body, her activities. Okay? And really, this is the body of this acrostic consists in two halves. In fact, there's a chiasm we'll see in the latter half, not in the first half, but the verse 19 serves as a Janus. We've talked about what a Janus is. I'll kind of show you how we see that. But really, verse 19 kind of seam stitches these two halves together, 13 through 18, and then 20 through 27. But the first half, the cottage industry, so to speak, lists all her different contributions to the family's economy. Okay, so she starts by establishing a cottage industry. Really just means she's producing clothes from raw materials. She uses the money she earns from the trade of textiles to purchase a field. In fact, she converts into a valuable, productive vineyard. There's all sorts of economic activity. Verse 13, how about we read all this together? So, Michael, would you read verses 13 through 18?
She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard. She dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out.
Excellent. So, I mean, even just at verse 13, searching for wool and flax, this positive attitude is driving her work in making thread from raw material, from animals, even from plants and vegetables, and she's working with her hands, so she's competent at manual labor. Her goal in this instance, producing clothing from scratch. Okay, the success, verse 14 of her industry, it provides enough income she can trade for exotic foods from far off places. There's a simile there. So she's like merchant ships. She's savvy. She's diligent in her trading. She brings food from afar. She's not confined to. I'm sure she would love locally sourced things, but she's not confined to locally sourced things. She can furnish her family with things from faraway fields. And then even to that figure of a trading fleet, the poet adds the figure of kind of like a lioness, probably a lioness. It's similar to there's similar type passages, but she rises, if you think like a lioness, while it's still night. So you kind of have this hunting imagery, not to be taken literally. Okay, she rises while it's still night. Think about a lioness hunting for food at night. Of course, this woman is not going to be out and about at night. Okay, we've established that in other places. But the figure is implying that she puts the well-being of her household above her own comfort. Okay, and so the parallel. See, she gives food to her household and a portion to her young women. Really, this would be those that are servant girls in her home. It underscores the success. She can not only feed her family, she feeds those who are an extended part of her household, and she's further enriching her household. Okay, and she makes plans in verse 16. She puts together a workable plan to obtain a field. She examines it, I'm sure, from all angles. She executes a plan. She buys it, from the fruit of her hand. So referring to the textiles that she made with her hands in verse 13. She plants the vineyard. She think of her as like an agent, and assuming the field's been dug up, it's cleared of stones, and now it's being planted with the choice vines. A question I want to pose here. As you look at the sorts of things here in this section that Michael read that are occupying her time, what attitude about her work is different from the prevailing attitude? I'm not saying everyone, but the prevailing attitude of women that work today. Any ideas on that? What attitude about her work is different from the prevailing attitude of many working women today? Any thoughts?
There's not an emphasis on the home.
Yeah, I think that's important.
There's a lot of people I see, not that I follow, but just that come
Sure.
out that are very happy about, I don't have kids, so I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
And I'm not like, you don't have to have kids.
Yeah.
It's very much like I don't know, it's just sad to me that they're so worried about themselves, and they're worried about anything coming in the way of their own self.
Yeah.
Like it's very selfish.
Have you, well, I'll just say that I mean, there are people that I know personally that their mentality and their marriage is the husband works and he provides to pay mortgage, pay insurance, pay bills, and, and the wife's income is everything else that I want. And again, this is not a broad brush stroke, but this is something that I think is common in the world, where those things are separate, and it's there's not. If you were to think of one word, like if you were to think of one word that would describe this, it's investment. She's making investment, whether it's her home, whether it's her family, those she cares for. I mean, she's really exemplifying a lot of this. I mean, especially when you think of little children. They can't take care of themselves. And they're, and even when you think of investment, it's not a callous term. Investment that's being made is that there will be fruit that comes from it. Part of that is having children that you see in verse 28 will at some point rise up and recognize what she's done. As for her husband also, he praises her. You've gone above them all, he says. So I think one that is definitely not self-centered. I think you made that point for sure. One that is home-focused. Any other thoughts?
Says she works with delight.
Great point, Seth. Great point. This is not a beleaguered is the word. This is not a beleaguered labor. Okay? This is not resentful. Yeah, I just think about what you were saying, Stephanie, and just think about celebrities recently who it's become a fad to be like, look how free I am to do what I want because I don't have children. And I don't chuckle because it's funny. It's so foolish. It's like how can you not see? How can you not see? So anyway, I don't want to cut anyone off. They had something to say. All right, well, let's keep going. So verse 17 and 18 to finish this section. She girds herself, verse 17, with strength. So undoubtedly, she's accomplished these achievements with hired workers. Okay, there's people that are working for her. It's not just her, you know. She has others. Nevertheless, she girds herself with strength. You see in verse 17. Okay, same idea for girding your loins, as we see, in Ephesians 6, or the Lord when he's speaking to Job. Put your belt on. Okay, put on a waistcloth. A waistcloth. Put on the clothes that are suitable for this task. Okay. Something that's going to prepare you for a difficult job or something that's heroic, okay? Again, the metaphor. She girds herself with strength. The metaphor, spiritual, physical strength, which is demanded for the things that she's accomplishing in her textiles, in her culinary art, in her farming. And so when she's girded, it says she makes her arms strong, okay? She has capability, she has tenacity to complete the task. And the idea that this woman dresses herself with strength, girds herself with strength, she covers herself with it. Okay? It is more than physical prowess. And so, if I'd ask a follow-up to this, as you examine her life in this poem, what sort of strength do you think is meant here? She clothes herself with strength. It's not just physical. What else would it be?
It has to be a godly strength.
Yes.
Because she can't. No woman can do all.
Exactly. I hope that's been clear. If it hasn't, it is now.
So it has to come from, and it's not just, oh God, please, just help me get through this day. It's, Lord, show me how I can serve my husband, how I can serve my family, how I can serve the community.
Yeah.
And with joy, not with resentment.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, I get to
do it over. I want to do it right. Yeah.
Well, I think, the times that I try to encourage my own wife are usually when it feels like to her like I'm hardly doing anything and I need strength to do the hardly anything. And I'm like, okay, I'm taking a step back and I'm scanning all of this. You are by no means doing hardly anything. And what you are doing, even though it may seem small in your eyes, is so huge. Just say 6 children to anyone and that will, it's so much.
Well, and I think we have to give credit to her husband as well. Because, we don't know what his perspective on this, and we don't know if he was a scoundrel or,
right.
A hateful.
We hope Lemuel wasn't.
Yeah, we don't know that. But I think for the men who might have a wife like this, they've got to recognize this, especially with, a bunch of kids, 6 kids or whatever.
Yeah.
That, or even with just one, but taking care of a house, buying a vineyard, planting, doing all of these things, and reserving time for her husband.
Yeah.
And she's amazing.
Yeah.
She's amazing, but and I'm guessing that this woman that can do this, even if she has a scoundrel for a husband, she's doing it because this is what God has.
Yes. Yes. Great point. Right, and that is a strength that is not something she can muster up on her own. So the reward she gains, if you look at 18, she senses her gain is good. That's part of motivating her to keep going. So the gain, the profit, what is this profiting her? The second half of that says her lamp doesn't go out at night. It probably doesn't mean she works late at night. It could. But we've seen in Proverbs, it's not wise to be a workaholic, to work day and night. You need adequate sleep. More probably, it means that she has enough, and this is really, it made me, when I was looking into this, one author suggested it really is similar to Middle Eastern proverbs that were around at the time that were similar, where the idea of her lamp doesn't go out at night. She has enough money. She doesn't need to save oil by snuffing out her lamp. There's this proverb that would have been around at the time, this Egyptian proverb that says he sleeps in the dark. And what it meant is he has not another penny in the house. And the idea is that in a well-ordered house, the lamp burns all night. It's a sign of life. When it's extinguished, that usually marks poverty, calamity. Okay? So he sleeps in the dark, as that proverb goes. The idea is he can't afford to keep the lamp on. That's one suggestion for what that could mean, which I think is somewhat plausible. But let's see this is where it splits in half at verse 19, leading into 20, but not all of 20. Verse 19 somewhat forms a seam between her cottage industry and her social achievements. It unites these sections of the body, where on one hand it forms an inclusion with verse 13, okay, concluding that unit on her textile manufacturing, developing her collection of wool and flax and all that sort of thing. And it's signified by the reference to the spindle that you see in verse 19. But on the other hand, this verse also links itself with the second half of the body about social achievements and how it's concentric in its structure. So you look at verse 19, she stretches out her hands to the distaff, okay? The distaff, remind myself, a part of the something that makes 2-ply, 3-ply yarn is the idea. It's similar to the spindle. Same idea. Stretches out her hands to the distaff. Her hands hold fast the spindle. Verse 20, this is how the Janus then looks forward, okay, because this looks back to verse 13, her textile industry. Verse 20, her hand now extends to the poor, okay, where it held fast to the spindle, now it extends to the poor. It offers these things to the poor. And then to tie back to 19 and bringing it forward, now she stretches out her hands to the needy. Okay? And so the second half of the poem's body, it really lists the valiant wife's contributions, not just to her whole household, but also to the community. This is where there's something of a chiasm. Okay? Remember a chiasm? Okay? It starts with one idea, and it builds to a crest, and then as the ideas descend on the other end, to where these are very similar, they match each other on either side of kind of this crest, okay? So verse 20, she extends her hands to the poor. 21, she's not afraid of the snow. We'll talk about what that means. Her household is clothed in scarlet. She makes coverings for herself. And then verse 23 at the crest, her husband's known at the gates, okay? So before, where she made coverings for herself, now she makes these coverings, these garments, and sells them. Where before her husband was clothed in scarlet, well, the wife is described as clothed with strength and majesty. Where before she's not afraid of the snow, she's not afraid of the potential distress. Here she smiles, she laughs at the future. Before, where it describes her as extending her hands to the poor, now she opens her mouth in wisdom in the ways that she watches over her household. Okay. So let's quickly walk through some of touch on some of the more important things. So pride of place, verse 20, is given to her kindness to the poor. In fact, Michael, why don't, or I had you read a section already. Denise, would you read 20 through 27?
She extends her hand to the poor, and she stretches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. She makes coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them and supplies belts to the tradesmen. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she smiles at the future. She opens her mouth in wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness.
Excellent. So in verse 20, you remember the king, he opens his mouth to defend the poor in court, their interests. Here the valiant wife is opening her hands to meet their physical needs. She's extending her hands to the poor. She stretches out her hands to the needy. Okay? In verse 21, the list of her activities, it returns to her textile industry, but now it's not just a source of income, but it's a means to protect her family from the cold. She's not afraid of the snow. She's not agitated by anticipated danger, okay? Something that would threaten their life. Okay? And that could just be financial ruin. Okay, not necessarily some sort of natural calamity. And scarlet, the idea of scarlet, or even the clothing in verse 22 that's purple, this is costly, and you're probably familiar with that idea. You remember, is it Lydia in the New Testament who made garments with purple? Purple. I mean, there's very few crustaceans that you'd have to gather, or very few sources of this crustacean. You crush the shells, you got to pull it out, crush the shell, and some sort of process to make purple. It's very expensive, so this is giving the idea that she's able to access these different things. Okay, so just for the poem overall, there's probably 2 or 3 things that you could identify as the basis of her confidence. We've talked about the fear of the Lord, things that exemplify nurturing, where no matter what tasks she's involved in, her aim's nurturing others. Here we're seeing that she's extending her hands to the poor. She watches over the ways of her household in verse 27. So one question I have about 26 I want to ask you. How is this nurturing aspect of her character demonstrated in her words? She opens her mouth in wisdom. You see, wisdom and loving kindness come from her. So how are those things nurturing? Any thoughts here? How are these words nurturing? Wisdom, loving kindness.
Those are godly qualities.
Yes.
I mean, those are godly. So when she's speaking with godly wisdom and godly nurturing, as opposed to gossiping.
Yep.
And disrespecting her husband.
Right.
Etc.
Well, and those I'm trying to think of, I'd written something down for 26, but basically the idea too is that she's practicing what she preaches. Okay, so there's a lot of all of this in one sense could be achieved in some degree without her. In theory, she could achieve much of this without fear of the Lord. Okay, outwardly, what this is saying is that this is reflective of what is inward, and ultimately, I think we could argue, even if she could achieve some of these things, where she's making things, she's being industrious, she's caring for, as far as physical needs, her family. There's going to be tangible fruit, and one of those is praise if this is all simply an outpouring of what's already inward, which, again, what comes from her mouth, what comes from her tongue, is what is reflective of what's in her heart. So wisdom, this class is all about wisdom. Loving kindness, hesed, so covenant-keeping love. So there's a commitment that she has to the people she's caring for here. It is a covenant commitment she's made. You think of the covenant she's made with her husband, okay? You think of the vows that she's made. You think of the bond that she would have with her children, that she carried, she birthed, she's nurtured and cared for. This is very real. This is all real and authentic and genuine. And that's why wisdom is what you see come from her mouth. The instruction she has is instruction that's birthed from loving kindness, from care, from mercy. So, yeah. I think just for sake of time, I want to ask you that follow-up question. But you see in verse 22, she makes coverings for herself. This is the only mention of this competent wife looking after herself, by the way. You know, you probably noticed that already. Yeah. And it's important because it does show she doesn't neglect herself even when she's helping others. And coverings, you see coverings. She makes coverings for herself. That probably refers to bed coverings. The bed's soft, it's comfortable, it's elegant. Her clothing is fine linen, it's purple. Okay? So she takes care of herself, for sure. You see in verse 23, her husband's known at the gates. This is the crest of the chiasm here. There's several reasons for that. He's free of domestic worries. Okay? That doesn't mean that he's free of whether my kids are misbehaving at home. That's not what we're talking about. Okay? I'm never free of those worries. But he's free of domestic worries. His prosperous household, it actually builds his reputation. People know who his wife is. Okay? They know how hard she works. They know how well she cares for her family. The apparel that his wife adorns him with. You see that in second half of 21. Her household is clothed with scarlet. Okay? And the gates here, he's known at the gates. Those symbolize the collective authority and the power of the city. Okay? So there's some sort of, he sits at the gates. Okay? He sits with the elders, I should say. He's known at the gates, sits with the elders. I mean, he's among the highest authorities of the city. I won't go into that any further, but she is not a weight to his reputation in his workplace. She is a boon to it, a great boon to it. She makes linen garments, 24, kind of an echo of 22. She makes linen garments. She sells them. Fashionable women's dress. The valiant wife is not only not afraid. You saw that in 21 and 25. She laughs. She smiles. She laughs at future danger. And that word strength, powerful energy, majesty, it really signifies the magnificence that elevates her above her peers. Okay? In the Old Testament, to put on clothing is symbolic of someone's true character. And so when it says strength and majesty are her clothing, that is her character. It is strong, it is magnificent. Okay? 26, she opens her mouth in wisdom. We mentioned that a little bit. Loving kindness, the instruction of loving kindness is on her tongue. The teaching of kindness, it matches her loving activities and serving others. And then 27, to successfully manage her household, she adds vigilance to her instruction. She watches. She keeps a sharp eye over the things in her household. She deals with problems quickly. She maintains order. The way mine translates it is she does not eat the bread of idleness. That is the direct contrast to the sluggard, the pathetic sluggard we've talked about. Proverbs 6 would be a great example of that. So the conclusion is the praise that she receives. So Lemuel's mother, King Lemuel's mother, concludes this song of praise to the valiant wife by citing the family's praise of their mother and wife, and then calling the community to praise her. And this woman is so concerned for others now, it becomes the central concern and praise of others. Okay? The woman who otherwise, you see in verse 21, she doesn't fear, not afraid of the snow, she doesn't fear. Here it says she fears the Lord in verse 30. A woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Okay, those words. Her children rise up and bless her. As for her husband, he also praises her, saying, 29, many daughters have done excellently, but you have gone above them all. Charm is deceitful, beauty is vain, but a woman who fears Yahweh, she shall be praised. Give to her from the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. This is reminiscent and should make you think of the praise that Jesus promises to the believer who perseveres. Well done, and good and faithful servant. Okay? So she arose early to provide for her household. Now her children rise up, presumably in her presence, to show their respect. Okay? She's living life optimally as the Creator intended. Her husband rises, praises her, and the poet quotes the husband with this superlative kind of praise. Many daughters, a synonym for women in poetry, have done excellently. Hayil. Okay? Again, we see that here. Valiantly, Hayil, excellently. The very quality the poet said was most rare among women in verse 10. So exceptional is the wife's valor that by comparison, valiant women are plentiful. But even granting that, he says, you have gone above them all. So his hyperbole isn't meant to negate that she's a model of excellence. It's meant to elevate her. Okay, and then that shift from you to she, you've gone above. Well, now it's back to the author is inserting himself at the end. She shall be praised. Let her works praise her in the gates. We're at the end of time. There's some more I wish I could be said, but I have this quote from. You think about, why spend all these verses focused on this one woman, and it's really to focus on the different traits that make her excellent. C.S. Lewis wrote, "If we do not admire what is praiseworthy, we would be stupid, insensible, and great losers." So we ought to admire that which God deems worthy of admiring and praising. So anyway, there was the article from Piper I thought was great on the excellent woman, where he talks about C.S. Lewis pointing out how joy isn't fully enjoyed until it becomes an expression in praise. And so the joy that this husband would have in his wife mounts to its highest when it's being expressed. And that's really the picture we're supposed to receive here. So anyway, that is chapter 31, and that is the end of Proverbs. So great job sticking with me to the end. We're not going to have a week 12 next week. We're going to conclude here. So I wish we could spend more time on it. And in a coming day, I talked to Eric the other day. I was like, maybe 2 years from now, we'll take 52 weeks to go through Proverbs, and we'll take a lot less sections and kind of go a little slowly. But I don't know. To me, this was just even very helpful for me to walk through this and think through it. And there's so much of Proverbs that I think it's easy to not just take the time, Selah, to just kind of sit and think about it. And I think some of the Proverbs are meant for us to do that. They're not just an instruction that Paul spells out, like this, and that's black and white. It's meant for us to really think about it, really think about how can we be wise to know how to use these properly. So anyway, that is the end of class.